For many movies, there is a good book or series of books behind it. This occurrence isn't just a coincidence, and in most cases, when brought to the big screen, many readers feel disappointed by the end result. It's even become a common sentiment to leave the movies thinking, the book was better than the movie. But is that the case for every film adaptation? Today, I will give my opinion on multiple books brought over to the big screen and how they measure up to their source material. Let's get into it. Let's start off with the most popular, Harry Potter. Harry Potter is probably the most influential piece of media to exist in the last couple of decades. Even now, there are still recreations, theme parks, merchandise being produced based on this series. So which is better, books or movies? Well, it's complicated, because there are 7 books and 8 movies, so let's analyze this piece by piece. We'll start by looking at the first in the series, The Philosopher's Stone. I feel the same way for the book as I do the movie, where it's a fine first installment for the series, nothing too spectacular happens, but the book does allow us to see a more unique perspective as you begin reading through the muggle eyes of Mr. Dursley before really entering the wizarding world. Not only that, but the mistreatment of Harry is a bit more extreme in the books, and I'll expand upon that in these later installments as well. But for this in particular, I feel the book is much better. Next, The Chamber of Secrets. This is probably the worst of the movies, and it doesn't help that the book is, in my opinion, so much better. You get a greater view of the wizarding life, even with the menial tasks like denoming the Garden of the Burrow. My personal favorite moment from the book is a Slytherin chant, "Weasley is our king." So for this one, easily, the book is better than the movie. Now we have Prisoner of Azkaban, which I believe is a fan favorite. And I have to agree, the beginning of the book is pretty strong with Aunt Marge and the Night Bus, but I felt after getting to Hogwarts, it got rather dull, unlike the fast pace that the movie offers. I also thought the time traveling worked a lot better than the film, where my dull mind was kinda confused by the book, so I'd have to give this one over to the movie. Now, Goblet of Fire is a much different story, no pun intended. This is just such a great book. I've read it so many times, it doesn't matter how good the movie is, and it is a good movie, but the book is so much better. From the beginning Quidditch match, as well as the looks into the Riddle House, and the school life is also just a favorite of mine, including Spew, which is just completely cut from the movies. It's where Hermione is trying to de-slave the house elves. Anyways, that's a whole thing. And the ending reveal as well of the Death Eaters gathered in the graveyard for the duel. I feel like it's handled a lot better in the book, so for this one I do have to give the point to the book. Now there is a very stark contrast to the next, which is Order of the Phoenix, which, God, the movie is so much better. The book is huge, and this book is also slow, and even if there are more important plots than the movie does give attention to, like the date with Cho Chang or the divination class being taken over by the Centaur Ferenzi, I'd rather leave all that stuff out if it meant this book was just shorter by even 300 pages. This book is huge, and that plea is indeed granted by the movies, where it's only about 2.5 hours, and I feel that's perfect. It's actually one of my favorites of the movies. So I have to give this point to the movie for Order of the Phoenix. And the next movie is also one of my favorites of the series, The Half-Blood Prince. But not only is it an amazing movie, it is an amazing book as well. This or Goblet of Fire are easily the best of the books. From the very start with the other minister, to the end with Snape's betrayal, I do feel that this movie does lean a bit more into romantic comedy, with like just brief undertones of darker themes at times. But I also like that. I like romantic comedy, so that works for me. But the book just has an amazing balance of everything, including the scenes with Dumbledore as well, as the revelations of the Horcruxes and the hunt for them as well. Both of these are extremely great pieces of art, but I would have to give it over to the book. The book is just so amazing. But that does bring us into the last of the series, The Deathly Hallows, which for this we actually have 2 movies and 1 book. But even with the 2 movies, there is a lot left out. Something that I actually did want to mention earlier, just the mistreatment of Harry. All throughout the books, when Umbridge is in there in Order of the Phoenix, she is so much worse. And Snape throughout the entire series, he is so much worse in the books than in the movies. Like, you would really think he is the villain. Even if he wasn't a bad guy, he is a villain at the very least. Which also makes the revelation upon his death, like, so much more impactful, because if you just read the books, I don't think you would feel there was anything good about him. His double agenting that occurs in the books is just top tier. But I would have to, again, give this over to the book. I think it does a much better job, especially with the Battle of Hogwarts, where you have, I think it's Kingsley, Molly Weasley, and Slughorn all versing Voldemort and failing, and then Harry takes up arms against him. I like that scene a lot more than the final duel that we got in the movies. So with that, the final tally does come to 5 books and 2 movies. Therefore, the books do win, so Harry Potter is better read. And with that being said, I do highly recommend you read them if you haven't indulged yourself in them already. Alright, so let's move on with The Hobbit, as well as The Lord of the Rings, but let's start with The Hobbit. And while they are in the same universe, they are separate entities, so we'll go in chronological order. So despite being written first, the Hobbit movies actually came after the Lord of the Rings movies, but even stranger than that is that word, movies. You see, the length of the Hobbit book is about as long as one of the Lord of the Rings books, which there are 3 books and 3 movies, so a book for each movie. So why do we have 1 Hobbit book and 3 movies for the 1 book? That doesn't make sense. That doesn't math. And I believe that's just for marketing. There is so much fluff and filler in these movies that I don't understand it. And it doesn't only make the viewing disappointing, but it makes it confusing. It's obvious a lot of what's in these movies was done based off the success of the Lord of the Rings movies, such as Legolas's involvement, as he doesn't exist in the universe up until the Fellowship of the Ring. Other characters such as Tauriel and Azog just don't exist in the book, and feel like they are being added just so they can lengthen the feature and make a Hobbit trilogy of movies, or a prequel trilogy for the Lord of the Rings, similar to that of Star Wars. However, this doesn't work, and the book is very clearly superior than all 3 of these movies, than every single one. So I definitely do recommend the telling of the classic Hobbit story. So books will win in that remark. On the other hand, the Lord of the Rings movies are extremely similar to the source material in the way that matters. Most of what is cut from the movie for me felt like that fluff and filler that was added to The Hobbit. Tolkien does a great job of detailing everything in his world, but for me, he does a bit too much of detailing. The Ents in the Two Towers, for example, are just such a slow burn and a boring read. I'm so grateful for how the movie treats these parts. It goes so much faster, even the extended edition, it goes so much faster. Other parts which are important in the book, such as the assistance from Tom Bombadil, are removed, and while I know he is another fan favorite, I am so glad for it. That scene just confused me. I never understood that. I thought when he was first introduced in the books, like, oh, maybe this guy's gonna come back in the last book, maybe he's important, but no, he just shows up and disappears and never comes back again, and I just don't understand why he would even be in the books. So I'm glad that he's not in the movies. He also just felt a bit magical, which is something I prefer to the movies, the more realistic tone that it sets and the stakes at hand. Another thing that was cut for the better, in my opinion, is the scouring of the Shire. At the end of the books, instead of the hobbits coming back after a prolonged period of time and setting back into their normal lives, almost like nothing has happened, there is instead, in the books, a battle for the Shire, as it's being set under attack, it's being sieged by Saruman. And I think so, it's kind of like the hobbits we follow in the story have a chance to be recognized by their own kind as they kind of lead this rebellion against Saruman. But to me, it just felt so random and out of place. I was like, oh, are we not done reading? Because this is like the last pages. But I do just prefer the extended cut where Saruman just falls from his tower. So I would say overall, every movie for Lord of the Rings beats every book, making this the first movie to completely beat out its counterpart. Alright, next up we have Percy Jackson. So it's actually really hard to compare Percy Jackson books to the movie. One, because the difference is. Two, because they actually stopped making the movies after 2 movies. but they also did start with a TV show, so I guess we can compare that as well. But yes, they are so different from the movies. Probably the main thing being that in the books, Percy starts at Camp Half-Blood as a tween. He is 12 years old, with the obvious difference in the movie, he's 16. This makes it really hard because there's actually a prophecy in the book that must be fulfilled by Percy by the time he turns 16. So when the movie starts, he's already behind. On top of that, the objective is completely different. The goal is to find and return the Master Bolt and defeat Kronos, but in the movie, there's like a greater involvement of Persephone and her pearls, which she doesn't even appear in the books until the final installment. The greatest takeaway from this is that I actually didn't enjoy the first book that much at all. It gets glazed so much. People talk about The Lightning Thief as it is peak, but I actually think it is the weakest installment of the entire Percy Jackson series. The scene in the carnival, the scene with the Chimera, and especially the scene at the mattress store just felt like they weren't going to end when I was reading them, and I was honestly just grateful that the movie was so much shorter than that read was. And honestly, I thought it was a lot funnier. The books definitely get better from here. I think this is the worst of the books. But if I had to choose for a Lightning Thief, I would give this to the movie. Next is Sea of Monsters, and this book is a lot better than the first. The beginning is still a bit slow, but the progression of the story and the characters is so much smoother, especially with a now established villain, and I do feel that the movie just throws that in the trash. The movie speeds things along, fighting the final boss of the series, Kronos, in the second installment, where the books create a slow burn, hinting at Kronos' return, and Percy isn't even the main protagonist of the quest to return the Golden Fleece, it's Clarisse. This movie is all over the place, and the book is so much better, so for Sea of Monsters, it definitely goes to the book. The TV show is only on its first season right now, and it does stick much closer to the book's source material, but then it also randomly will just go unnecessarily off script. Like when they meet Ares, Grover should be joining them in the carnival, but instead he stays back and is like outsmarting the god of war, which just doesn't make sense to me. I don't know, I didn't like the adaptation of the show at all. I do look forward to season 2 because it may just be that I don't like The Lightning Thief at all, and that's what the first season is. So the way I would put it is the book is better than the show, but the first movie is better than the book, and then the second book is better than the second movie. And I do feel that that second movie could have had a lot going for it if they had just set up that world correctly, but they were really rushing things and it just got thrown into the trash with that movie. Let's get out of fantasy and dive a bit more into fiction. These books that we're about to talk about became a phenomenon after this first movie was released, The Hunger Games. And it's no surprise why. The idea of fighting for your life in an arena for someone else's entertainment has always been a subject of interest when you think about it. And this is essentially the modern day equivalent of that. Now, I've only read the original trilogy, so that's what we'll be focusing on for this video, and the original book is absolutely rapturing. I love the little details that Katniss picks up on about the Capitol's hypocrisy, and how the spies that are watching her, they keep changing how she acts constantly. However, something the movies have that I envy is the perspective from the Capitol, watching the game makers, especially just any scene involving President Snow. We see him for a very limited time, and the wonderful acting from the now late Donald Sutherland is absolutely fantastic. Another random difference is a lot of the characters from the books are just scrapped. Like Madge, who actually gives Katniss the Mockingjay pin, is just not included in the films at all. There is also a much greater emphasis on the games. It covers 2/3 of the book, and there are a lot more sponsorships being received due to Katniss and Peeta's acting during the games. I would say that the attention to detail and how Katniss determines her actions through always being watched definitely makes the books the better version of this story. And that pretense continues for Catching Fire. Something I didn't like about Catching Fire is that Mags doesn't speak at all, where in the book she speaks, but it's just really hard to understand. Also, the description of her relationship with Finnick is really heart-shattering in the books. But something worth noting is that the games in the first book went on for about a month, and in Catching Fire, they were completed within 3 days. So in the first book, they covered 2/3 of that book, and in the second book, they actually only encapsulate 1/3 of Catching Fire. Something I don't think the movies accurately display. The books take a lot of time building up the idea of the civilians rising up against the Capitol and forcing Peeta and Katniss to turn their backs on the people who are suffering these same injustices that they are. And in the movie, it just kind of feels glossed over, like a montage scene and then right back into the games. That's why people like this stuff, the Hunger Games. Let's throw them in the games. And for me, that does make the book better, so for both of those, I have to give it to the book. And now to Mockingjay. This is definitely the worst of the trilogy, and nobody ever wants a bad ending, but that's what is delivered here. And for the movies, twice, because there is a part 1 and 2. While I don't think it's necessary for there to be 2 parts for Mockingjay, and I feel a 3-hour film would have sufficed, that's irrelevant here. I don't think they needed all of the scenes with Katniss just sort of talking with Gale. It felt really forced, and I understand it's just supposed to show her relationship with Gale sort of falling off, and I do think that the parallel in the books handles that worse, as it lasts longer and it's an even slower burn for that disintegration. And for this final Hunger Games, I do prefer the 2 movies. I think they go a lot faster, and the action scenes felt a bit hard to visualize in the book, where the movie gives a rather clear view of what's happening. It shows the rebellion really occurring, where in the book they're just like, or District 11's kicked the Capitol out. And it's just like Katniss waking up in bed hearing this news. In the movie, it's actually showing like the people planting mines or putting bombs at the dam, and it's real action happening, which I just felt really wasn't displayed by the books. And you also get to see them hum along with a Mockingjay tune. I actually think for the movies, Mockingjay is so much better. So overall, for this series, Hunger Games is a better book, as well as Catching Fire, and Mockingjay better as the movies. But that is just my opinion for these great series that have been fleshed out into movies. Not every series gets this opportunity, so it is definitely fun to compare just how well it holds up to that source material. But if you did enjoy, please leave a like and subscribe, as I may do another one of these in the future. And as always, take care.